what has happened here to make so many people so afraid to call it out for what it was, which was predominantly British Pakistani Muslim men abusing, raping, drugging young, often underage, white English girls?
All right, so let's think of 4 bins of complexity that surround the issue. Okay, so the first is the racial divide that typifies the crimes. So it's Pakistani Muslim immigrants and white working class young girls. So there's a racial, ethnic, and religious divide that is part and parcel of the crime. Then there's a class issue in the UK with regards to the victims and also the whistleblowers.
So, what you're about to watch is Jordan Peterson breaking down one of Britain's darkest scandals on Piers Morgan Uncensored. But this isn't just about crime statistics or individual cases. It's about how an entire system chose politics over protecting children. I'm going to add my thoughts throughout, and I need you guys to weigh in down below. Let's expose what's really going on together.
There's like Robinson. Then there's the meta problem of the difference between Islam and Christianity. The additional problem that psychopathic sadists use religious justification to camouflage and justify their crimes. Then there's the problem of open borders and immigration and the progressive presumption that all cultures, no matter their difference, are valuable in their diversity and can be integrated peacefully into society at, what would you say, an indefinite rate. Okay, and then to add another level of complexity, there's the politicking between the progressives and the right wing with regards to all the issues I just described. Okay, so that's like an absolute bloody rat's nest. And there's lies in every one of those, along every one of those dimensions that are extraordinarily deep and pervasive. And so I was very apprehensive about this discussion with you, Piers, because there's almost no way of weaving, let's say, our way through this without making egregious errors.
Yeah.
So, okay, so well, let's, on the psychological side, let's point out 2 primary realities. The first is that sexual misbehavior of even of the sadistic kind is to be expected.
Hold up. Jordan's hitting on something crucial here. He's exposing how predators weaponize cultural differences and ideology to justify their actions. But here's what's wild. The system didn't just fail to stop them. It actually helped cover it up. Every single time. Watch how deep this goes.
You might think about it as an aberration from the norm, but it's only an aberration when the norm is deep and profound and the consequence of many years of socialization and centuries of history. Like the default position for an unguarded woman worldwide and throughout history has been rape target. That's the norm, not the civilized conduct that generally obtains between men and women, even in public, like on the streets in the West. And then there's the additional issue that resentful, psychopathic, sadistic, low-status, desperate men will use any excuse whatsoever to get access to women. So those are just some of the ugly realities that we have to contend with to weave our way through this complete bloody mess.
Yeah, and it is very complex, but at the heart of it, you also have a massive cover-up where people from local government, from the main federal government, police, social workers, almost everybody whose job it is to protect particularly vulnerable young girls in society. I mean, I can't think of a group you would more want to protect or throw the force of the establishment protective arm around than vulnerable young girls. At every level, they conspired to not just fail them, but they failed them in many cases deliberately because they didn't want to, in their eyes, let off a tinderbox, a racial tinderbox, by telling people, hey, you know what's happened here? A very large number of British Pakistani Muslim men have been systematically raping young, damaged white girls, in some cases not damaged before they got their hands on them, for a very, very long time, and we've done very little about it. And they didn't want to say this because they were terrified that there would be a huge scandal around that, and there would be a lack of, there would be unrest in communities and so on, which to me seems the ultimate in moral cowardice.
Well, okay, I think there's two things going on there, Piers. The first is the certainty that anyone who would blow the whistle would be subject to the worst possible of cancellations by the woke mob. And that this is partly why I have some sympathy for Tommy Robinson, let's say, because it is definitely the case that to take a stand against this is to make yourself a target for the worst sort of calumny and legal action. So the threat is real. And the cancel culture types are very good at identifying individuals and bringing reputation savaging to bear on them in an extremely effective way. So people had reason to be afraid. Now, I'm not saying that that fear justifies their silence or their complicity, but we have to be clear about the fact that their fear is real.
Yeah.
Now, there's another aspect to that that's even uglier than this, I think, Piers, which is that, look, we know that when you destabilize a community with rapid transformation, this could be, let's say, with regards to the green agenda that makes energy more expensive, or to uncontrolled immigration, any rapid change with economic consequences demolishes the lower rungs of the socioeconomic hierarchy most particularly, right? They say that when the aristocracy catches a cold, the working class die of pneumonia, and that's a deep biological and sociological truth. Now, one of the corollaries of that, and this is where it gets ugly, is that it's very easy for the elite, especially in a relatively class-based system like the UK, to virtue signal about their progressive openness and their cosmopolitan sophistication, while sacrificing the genuinely poor and dispossessed, so the English working class, to the depredations of whatever virtue signaling policy happens to be conveniently at hand. And so partly it's cowardice, partly it's fear of say, being singled out and canceled, but it's also partly willingness on the part of the elite to sacrifice the genuinely downtrodden and poor to their moral presumptions, to their costless virtue signaling. And that happens consistently throughout the West now. Almost all the progressive agenda, including the open immigration policies, are absolutely devastating to the people who can least afford to be devastated. So I would say the elite in Great Britain made a choice to sacrifice the children of working class Brits to the moral grandstanding of their progressive elitism.
Wait. Let this sink in. The elite didn't just fail these girls, they sacrificed them. For what? Their own moral grandstanding, their own political comfort. And notice the pattern. Whenever their reputation was at risk, they chose themselves over justice. Every time.
And that's in addition to the absolute cowardice that, had some justification in real fear, because there was a cost. And I think that's why Robinson is such a complex figure, because, you said in your introduction, you're not very happy about his documentary. And I don't know what to make of that documentary, the one that, as you said, savaged the reputation of the Syrian immigrant. There's so many layers of lies surrounding absolutely everything that's part and parcel of this complete bloody catastrophe that it's very difficult to get to the truth.
Yeah, I mean, look,
but one of the things that we can say is that...
Yeah, I mean, look, on Robinson, here's what I would say.
Yep.
I watched your interview with him. I've interviewed him myself. He's not he's not stupid. He's very articulate. He speaks in a very passionate manner. But the things I have a problem with Robinson about are this. One is, I don't think people in America, it seems to me, in the last week, since Elon Musk did a torch to all this, and in my opinion, probably did us a massive favour as a country, notwithstanding a lot of the things he said, I think, have been quite problematic in terms of the vitriol on certain individual members of Parliament. For example, he targeted one female member of Parliament, Jess Phillips, who then got immediate death threats. People are now being arrested in connection with those death threats. It is serious because 2 members of Parliament in Britain have been murdered in the last 10 years by people who didn't agree with their opinions. So I think there's a responsibility that Elon has, which he has to tread carefully about in how he says things about public officials. However, he's absolutely right to say that this is a scandal that hasn't gone away, that the cover-up has never been properly investigated, that people were never held properly accountable, that no one has gone to prison who was at any level of responsibility for trying to protect these girls. None of them were properly held to account. All of that, I think, is a valuable thing that Elon Musk has now made everyone think about properly. And the only answer to me is a full independent national inquiry to get to the bottom of all of it and then to hold people properly accountable. My problem with Robinson being the so-called hero of this is that many people in America, and I'm not saying you're one of them, I'm sure you now know a lot more about him perhaps than you did before, but Robinson is not in prison right now for anything to do with the gang rape scandal. He's in prison because of this movie he made, this documentary, as he put it, as a journalist, which I don't think he is. He's someone who made a film after he was convicted in a court by a judge of being seriously defamatory to a young Syrian refugee boy.
Now watch this. Even when we talk about this scandal today, the system tries to change the subject. They want us debating the messengers instead of focusing on the thousands of victims who never got justice. But here's what they don't want you to see. This goes way beyond any one person or group. This is about systemic failure at every level.
Who he tried to make out was the villain of a bullying incident that went viral because there was a clip, when in fact he was the victim. The judge made it crystal clear in his very extensive ruling, which I read at length last night. It's many, many pages. It's extremely detailed. It includes his analysis of all the witness statements, what the school have told him, all the documentary evidence and everything. There's no doubt that the judge's conclusion is that the victim was the victim, that the boy who did the bullying in the video that went viral, Bailey, who was befriended by Tommy Robinson, that he was also a victim in many ways of the firestorm that erupted after this story went viral. He also made it clear that Bailey had not had a racial motivation that he could establish against a Syrian refugee, which had been the original narrative that went out there. So it was very educational, this judgment, in many ways. He getting to the bottom of what had happened. But he also made clear that the 5 witnesses which Robinson brought to court to try and support his proposition that this Syrian refugee was the bad one of the 2, that all of their evidence was lacking in credibility. In fact, he called it, he said some of them had clearly invented their testimony completely. And he was very scathing about the quality of the evidence of everyone that Robinson brought there. And in the end, he found Robinson guilty of defamation. He fined him £100,000 and I think £700,000 in legal costs. And he made it crystal clear to him, do not repeat these lies about this Syrian refugee boy, Jamal, again. And all that Robinson did was go away and repeat them to absolutely everyone, including in this film, to wide audiences. And they are ultimately lies, as proven in a very forensic and extensive court case held by a very eminent judge. So my problem with Robinson is that he's trying to portray himself as this great martyr who's been, had lawfare put against him by the British establishment to silence him, when in fact it was his refusal to be silenced and to repeat lies about this young Syrian refugee boy, which is why he's in prison. Secondly, my problem with him, Jordan, if I'm honest, is I don't know how many Americans or people in America who've been following this, because I see all the stuff on social media, they just don't seem to understand that Robinson's criminal record is highly extensive and very unpleasant. So, for 20 years, he's been breaking the law. He attacked an off-duty police officer. He led a hooligan group of football thugs in a brawl involving 100 people. He headbutted a man in Blackburn. He used a false passport to get round the fact he had criminal convictions in the UK to get into America and was caught. He perpetrated mortgage fraud, over £160,000. He was then found in contempt of court twice for turning up at court cases involving people who had been accused of committing these heinous crimes of grooming and raping these girls, nearly wrecking the trials because he was saying defamatory things in public outside the courtroom. And then we come to the refugee story, in which he's now back in prison again. And he was found guilty of stalking a journalist and accusing her partner of being a paedophile. This is not a nice guy. This is a pretty repellent human being who also simultaneously has been right to bang on for many years about the scandal of the rape gangs. So, yes, he's complicated, but at the heart of it is somebody who I think also, just finally on the point of Robinson, 2 points I'd make. One, I think he's done this.
Listen, you guys, what we just watched isn't just about one scandal or one cover-up. This is about an entire system that chose politics over protection, reputation over responsibility. The elites sacrificed the most vulnerable members of society to protect their own comfort. If you're ready to expose more of these systemic failures, hit subscribe and drop System Exposed in the comments. We're just getting started.